All right. Yeah, some years back, I made up my mind that to the best of my ability, I want to be different. And the truth is, when you make that decision, get ready for it. You will face a lot of challenge. Sometimes you feel ostracized. A lot of persons will move away from you. You know, just because you want to be different, right? It is a tough decision for any young person to make. When I make that decision, I knew it wasn't going to be easy for me. So I really need to develop a framework that will help me to withstand the challenge that comes up, right? So I decided to, start looking for information that will put me on the right track. So I started buying book. I remember that time, that was after my secondary school, so I was teaching in missionary school. So while I was there, the first salary that I earned that month was 9,500. I took up to 7,500. That is plus my transportation. It should be around 7,500. So I went to a bookstore to pick book, by Norma Vincent Peale, Brain Tracy, John C. Maxwell, and some other good books. So I bought up to 6 copies of book that very time, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and I started reading those books. So while I was reading, the book by Norma Vincent Peale that I bought was The Power of Positive Thinking, right? Yeah, so I bought that book. A lot of you must have read that book. It's a nice book. Yeah, I read that book within 3 days, and I was blown up. Like, I began to see things from a different perspective. So and from there I continued to consume more information. I read book by Tony Robbins, I read book by Robin Sharma, and a lot of other books out there that I began to consume. Yeah, because the truth is, if you really want to change your environment, you really need to be a changed person. Because if you are not changed, there is no way that you can change your environment. You can't fight the environment that made you. That is one of the hardest truths that anybody out there will tell you. Your environment fed you. The environment gave you the information that controls your thinking process. Your environment tells you what success is and what success is not. Your environment shows you who should be your role model and who shouldn't be your role model. Your environment, taught you spirituality. Your environment exposed you to education. Your environment does a lot of stuff to you. So you can't fight it. You can't fight it. So if you really want to be above your environment, you have to learn differently. You have to start thinking differently. And I tell you, it is a whole lot of work. It will take a lot of time. You get frustrated along the line, but you just need to know that you want to be different, and sometimes it will demand God pulling you away from that environment. You saw that happening, all across the Bible. God trying to use Abraham to become something better. God have to pull him away from his environment to the land of Canaan, and then from there he puts him through a new orientation and start teaching him anew, right? So for God to use you, he really need to change you. How did God do that? He changed your environment and then expose you to a new form of information that recalibrate your mindset, right? So you see, Moses was born in Egypt, grew up in Egypt, and by the time God wanted to start using him, there was a conflict of information, there was a conflict of idea. God have to pull him from Egypt, took him to Midian, and he spent around 40 years in the land of Midian to become a new person. And by the time he came back to Egypt, he came back and revolutionized the whole environment, because he's coming in with a new information, with a new orientation, right? So when I was reading those books, I started seeing things differently. I started seeing things from a different worldview, and that alone impacted me big time. I listened to ministers, people like Dr. Pastor Paul Enenche. His messages were the first set of message that I was exposed to. I can still remember one of his preaching. I listened to that preaching more than 3 months. That was the only preaching I had on my phone. Leadership Dynamics. That was the title of the message. Up to 1 hour preaching also. That message, changes me. Like, it got to a certain point that I could recite the message like from beginning to the end, because I was listening to that message every day that I'm on my phone. So that message changes my life. Made me to begin to see things from a different angle, pour me with the hunger to start reading more books, and all of that. So if you really want to impact the environment, you have to think differently. You have to consume differently. You have to do stuff that are different from what every other person is doing.